Welcome back, pet parents. You know that I am all about feeding the dog or the cat in front of you. That's a very individualized approach, which most of our society does not take, and I understand that. But when we talk about individualized approaches and feeding the animal in front of you, we need to have a lot of options. We need to have a lot of tools in our toolkit, however you want to say it, whatever analogy you want to use. We need to have lots of options. And because not only will different dogs need different things, well, different dogs will thrive on different foods and different types of foods, but even the same dog will go through seasons of life. They may develop an illness or a disease, and certainly as they age into their senior years, if we're lucky enough, right? When we're lucky enough for our dogs to age into their senior years, sometimes they just need different foods to thrive, to continue to thrive. So I like to bring you lots of different guests, always handpicked by me, but I am never, ever going to bring you a guest that I don't align with. And I absolutely, wholeheartedly, completely align. I absolutely love the woman that I have on today's podcast episode. She is always so much fun to talk to. She is a wealth of knowledge. And boy, we didn't even scratch the surface. But believe me, I am going to be going back and re-listening to today's episode multiple times and taking notes because she has so much to say, and I highly recommend you do the same. Who is today's guest? Well, none other than the absolutely incredible and beautiful Amy Renz. She is the founder, the CEO of Goodness Gracious Pet Food Company. And while she started out doing lots of different treats, single ingredient treats, wonderful. What my dog loves her treats, by the way. In 2021, she branched out into gently cooked foods for dogs. And not only gently cooked foods for dogs, but foods that are completely balanced with whole food ingredients. No supplements added. This is especially heavy on my heart. The use of synthetic ingredients, synthetic vitamins and minerals. We call them premixes a lot of times. This is especially heavy on my heart the more and more and more I learn with nutrition for our animals and for ourselves, by the way. The more and more I learn, this is just a heavier and heavier topic. Amy explains it beautifully, and I want to let her explain it to you. So without any further ado, let's get into today's episode with Amy Renz of Goodness Gracious. Have you tried training methods that just didn't work? Do you feel that your pet is not getting his or her nutritional needs met? Are illnesses and bad behavior your daily norm? You're going to want to join me on the Pet Parenting Reset, where you'll hear interesting and informative interviews and get solutions to all your pet problems. I'm your host, Jessica L. Fisher. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. And you are the CEO of Goodness Gracious, which is a pet food company, and you are doing some gently cooked foods, which I'm so into these days as my dog is heading into her senior year. She just turned 10 and she has been raw fed since the day we adopted her. But I know that every dog needs to be fed as an individual and what's going on with them. And there are seasons in life, whether dogs are going through, chronic illness, disease processes, or even as they get into their senior years, we might need to do some cooking for them. And having commercial options for really high quality foods that are gently cooked is something that I feel like I've been showcasing on the podcast a lot lately. So it must be the universe telling me something. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure, Jess. Thank you for having me. This is super exciting.
Yes. So how would you mind just I like to start at the start. And how did you
Yeah,
get into the pet food business and how did Goodness Gracious start?
sure. So goodness gracious is, I started it in 2010 and it was a right turn for me. I was doing something completely different. I was actually running a small software company. And so back up a couple of years from 2010, because to put something like that together, right, takes a village, there's a backstory. So I got my first dog of my own in 2007, and then about 6 months later, I got a sister for her. And so I grew up with dogs. My sister's a veterinarian. For her, that was a calling, right? I mean, she was a person who would rescue squirrels. But mine, I wasn't quite. My path was not quite as obvious for me, and but it became obvious in around 2007 and 2010. So in '07, that was, I'm old enough to remember the melamine problem that happened with a whole bunch of dog foods and cat foods and treats, where there was melamine tainting the products, which made a whole bunch of animals sick. And then shortly after that, there was a problem with chicken jerky that caused kidney damage in animals. And we never really got to the bottom of that, but it seemed to center around chicken jerky and some imports. And then about that same time frame, there was also a very large pet food company who I won't name, but we are very familiar with their products. And their employees got sick from exposure to mold and fumigants. And I was in this state where I just did not know what I was going to feed my girls. And I think I got angry. I was distrustful. I started making food for them at home, and not knowing anywhere what I know today, I definitely made some mistakes. But so that was, it was around 2008, 2009. And then, I turned 40 in 2009, and I started asking myself some pretty big questions like, who are you helping? And I remember not having a very good answer for myself. And there were rewards certainly in my job, but building shareholder value and helping people along a career path really wasn't something that made me sleep super well at night. And so I thought that and about that same time, I also learned how many animals that we were euthanizing in our country, homeless ones, because people failed them. And it's much better now, but at that time it was about 3 to 5 million. And I thought, if I could create a company that makes something super nutritious and wholesome for our companion animals that have homes, and takes those proceeds and donates it back to address this homelessness problem, then then I know who I'm helping, right? And so that became the reason for the right turn and the start of Goodness Gracious in 2010. And so when we began, we were primarily a treat company. We were making dehydrated single ingredient jerky, a couple of different biscuits. We've added some product lines along the way. We still make that jerky today. It's still single ingredient, still one of our top sellers. In 2021, late 2021, we added food to our lineup, and it's something I've been wanting to do for a super long time, but I didn't quite have the mechanism down in which to bring it to market, right? I knew I didn't want to make kibble, knew I didn't want to make canned food. We were primarily a dehydration company. At least that's the equipment that we have. We manufacture everything ourselves. So a little bit of a control freak in that way. And we're a licensed and inspected human food facility. So raw really wasn't in our wheelhouse, right? Being, that kind of manufacturing facility. So fortunately, the market had really started to mature a lot in this whole gently cooked space. And, it's a gateway to raw for some people. It makes parents feel a little bit, that might be concerned about food safety and handling techniques, it gives them an answer. But, I raised my dogs on gently cooked food. I raised that first pack on them, and I raised the one I have now on it. And it really is, we preserve, and I think sometimes there's this thought that maybe we're destroying a lot of nutrients when we gently cook foods, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that. But humans live on for the most part on a gently cooked diet, and unless we're eating ultra processed foods and cooking the crap out of something, there's really a lot of nutrition that's still in that food. And so anyway, so I thought that if I could create, I did, we created these gently cooked recipes that are high protein, moderate fat, low carb, really glycemic load of 1, and a lot of phytonutrients in them, because I think regardless of what kind of food format we're looking at today, a lot of really good phytonutrients, plant matter is missing in a lot of diets. And so we start to see like hypersensitivities develop because of imbalances in the gut. And maybe we'll talk more about that. But yeah, so that was 2021. We came out with 4 recipes. We've added a 5th, and they're 100% whole food. So there's no synthetics in any of them. And now we have some really kind of other really cool ideas cooking up in our kitchen that I'm going to be excited to talk about maybe in a couple of months. But,
well, maybe we'll have you back to talk about them.
Yeah, that'd be great.
There were so many things you said in there that I would absolutely love to expand on. And I think, stories are how we relate best to our audience and to our tribe. And I know for my dog, she's wonderful. Like, she's if I actually knocked on wood right now, I'd wake her up. So I'm not going to do that, but like, knock on wood, she is very healthy. And by all accounts, like, I would have no reason to go out and do any testing on her because she's perfectly healthy, but I do all of the testing anyway because I'm that kind of dog mom.
Yep.
And
Yep.
So I know through animal biome testing that she doesn't have a balanced microbiome, and I gut microbiome. And further testing through innovative pet labs, I know she also, like, at the same time, doesn't have inflammation markers. So like, I'm in this weird stage where like, I know that she's good, quote unquote good, right. But at the same time, I know there are things that I can do to further optimize her health, because I know I'm completely blessed. It's okay. We're all pet people.
I know, right?
My dog will do it sometimes too. Like, I'm completely blessed to be in the position that I am in, where I'm not just seeking for my dog to survive. I want her to thrive. And I know that we're lucky to be in a mind space where we can think that way and not just, what food am I putting on the table tonight? Right there. Like, there are people out there like that. I get that. And we just always, whatever stage we're at, want to do the best we can with what resources we have. So I have been adding more vegetable fiber to my dog's diet, and I'm slowly seeing improvements in her gut microbiome by doing that. And I say slowly because I could be adding a whole lot more vegetable, low glycemic vegetables to her food. But she doesn't like them. So I have to kind of temper what I do with like what she'll actually eat.
Yeah.
So that's a very interesting thing that I know you did like a whole presentation at Feed Reel on metabolic health, metabolic disease in dogs. So I do want to talk about that maybe a little bit later on, and we can tease that right now that we will talk about that a little bit later on. But with goodness gracious, I also love that you are doing everything with whole foods. So we're not adding a bunch of synthetic vitamins and minerals back to whatever food you do come up with, because there are quite a few. I mean, there is a lot of pet food out there. There are a lot of options for people. And generally, when you're looking at, an average consumer is looking at the difference in two packages, and you're seeing, the main ingredients are the same in these two foods, but one of them is significantly cheaper, it's probably because it's got a premix in there. So when you're balancing with whole foods, can you tell me a little bit about like the quality of ingredients and why that was so important to you to balance with whole foods?
Oh, sure. So, interesting statistic, right? There was a large pet food study done in 2020, mostly by industry trade associations, so pet food industry trade associations. And they found that and reported that of the 8.65 million tons of ingredients that go into pet food, 13% of it is an additive. So, like that encompasses all of these vitamin and mineral mixes, and 0.05% of it was a green leafy vegetable. So, I mean, right? So just sit back and think about that one for a second, right? I mean, we know what our doctors tell us, and to kind of eat the rainbow, more or less, right? And in human medicine, there was a massive study done of something like 400,000 humans, and it looked at the tried to correlate daily multivitamin use, right? Multivitamin and mineral supplements to the prevalence of chronic disease, all-cause mortality, so things like cancer, cardiovascular disease, and found that there was no correlation whatsoever to multivitamin use and chronic disease. So like all of the humans out there who are popping those pills every morning, not really helping you, right? I mean, your diet is going to help you. So synthetics in particular are super important because the body does not look at synthetics the way that it looks at a vitamin or a mineral that naturally occurs in food. And, not for nothing, it's not only the vitamins and minerals that are in spinach, for instance, or blueberries, but it's the polyphenols and the antioxidants that are in those things that are, help us with regards to proper cellular signaling and help increase the antioxidant power of our cells. So, but back to synthetics. So as in a couple of examples, synthetic phosphorus is widely used in pet food, right? I mean, it's found naturally in meats. So if you're eating a diet or feeding a diet to your dog that has good quality protein in it, like from muscle meats, you're going to get enough phosphorus. But highly processed foods reach for synthetic phosphorus, right? And these are things like phosphates. So phosphates differ. I think I need to tell her to be quiet. So phosphates differ in the way our body processes them. So in long-term use, they're actually linked to kidney damage, and they're widely used in pet food. So the largest or the biggest sources of them are going to be in all life stages in puppy formulas. So when dogs eat a synthetic phosphorus, for example, it increases phosphorus levels in circulation, unlike natural phosphorus, and it also increases parathyroid hormone. And parathyroid hormone is important because it triggers the body to release vitamin D, which puts calcium into circulation. So you can get hypercalcemia and hyperphosphatemia, and these things are associated with all kinds of metabolic dysfunctions. So like sodium retention, high blood pressure, damage to our kidneys, and that kind of thing. So, there are plenty of other examples like synthetic vitamin D, that the chemical structure of that synthetic vitamin D matters, right? It matters because it can be absorbed anywhere from 2 to 5 times more or less than natural forms of vitamin D that come from food. And vitamin D deficiency is associated with cancer, metabolic dysfunction, immune dysfunction, all those kinds of things. Choline, synthetic choline is widely used, and choline is found in eggs, right? And we use about 6 to 8% of our recipes use eggs because we get the choline from in our recipes from eggs. But synthetic forms of choline don't behave like natural forms of choline. So it increases TMAO, and TMAO, once it's released, it's a toxin, and it's not good for your body. It's associated with adverse events, including in cardiovascular disease cases and kidney disease cases. So, these things, we shouldn't look at them lightly. Targeted nutrition, if you find a pet food, a commercial pet food that you really like, or if you have a recipe that you really like, and it's short on maybe 1 or 2 nutrients, that's a whole different, reaching for singular supplements and using them in targeted recipes is a far, far different thing than what happens in most commercial pet food right now. And in most of those products, you look at them and they've got 25 different synthetics in it, and no one knows the reaction those things will have in a petri dish, let alone the wildly diverse general population of our actual dogs and cats. Bodies are not a vacuum, right? When your phosphorus levels are off, or your calcium levels are off, or your iron levels, or your copper levels, or your zinc levels, those things all interact with each other, and we can see chronic disease or just dysfunctions happen because biochemically our body's off.
Yes, and the way I learned it was like, you have, say, vitamin A that's coming from a natural food source, and vitamin A that has been made in a lab. And when these two things enter our body, our cells, like the vitamin A from the natural food source, like fits like a puzzle piece. Like it just naturally fits into like our own cellular structure in our bodies. But this created in a lab vitamin A, it'll make it fit, but it doesn't quite fit the way it's supposed to because it's not natural. It didn't come from nature. And the way I learned it was that if you were feeding like a natural vitamin A, a food that has naturally occurring vitamin A, and then a synthetic vitamin A that was made in a lab at the same time, and this synthetic vitamin A kind of attaches to be used in the body and broken down and methylated, it does, like the natural vitamin A doesn't have anywhere to go, kind of. So like it's this like gamble, which one is going to get into the body and get methylated first, right? What are we doing here?
Right. Yeah, so xenobiotic metabolism, right? That's when the body takes a look at all those foreign substances that it gets on a daily basis and has to do something with them, right? So, and those foreign substances are synthetics, right? They are food additives, it's pollution, it's glyphosate in our food, right? All of those things the body has to break down, figure out what to do with. And the more of those insults that we have, the more oxidative stress the cells of our body go through, right? And oxidative stress is simply that. It's when the insults to a cell overwhelm that cell's antioxidant power, right? Overwhelm its ability to fight it off. And oxidative stress is at the root of all chronic disease, right? A great example, in addition to vitamin A, would be copper, right? And this isn't something that this is a change that happened by AAFCO, so the American Association of Feed Control Officials, right? They're the ones that set all the rules for pet food in the United States. And in 1997, they approved chelated copper as a synthetic supplement or synthetic form of copper that can be added to food. So up until that time, it was something like copper oxide, which is really not that great anyway. But copper oxide and copper naturally occurring in food, like you would find in oysters, maybe, right? Has and liver, right? Beef liver in particular, not necessarily any other kinds of liver, but it's highest in beef liver. Natural copper has a bioavailability of about 30 to 40%, right? But chelated copper, and the body actually, when you ingest it, the more you ingest, the less you absorb, and it eliminates the excess in the stool. So that's natural copper. Chelated copper is a form of copper that's bound to generally an amino acid, like either an amino acid or an organic acid. And when that happens, it becomes highly bioavailable, right? It's able to pass through essentially your gut into circulation. And so chelated coppers have a bioavailability of about 80 to 90%. And not only that, they bioaccumulate in your liver. And so it can cause in dogs, in the general population of dogs, copper associated hepatopathy. It used to be that you would only see that disease in certain breeds that were predisposed to it for genetic reasons. We're now seeing it in a lot of dogs, and it's because there's excess copper used as a synthetic that's used in pet food, and it's a format that is so easily absorbed and bioaccumulates. And so there are major differences, to your point, between the structure of a synthetic versus the structure of a natural substance. So, we really need to pay attention to those things.
Yeah, and I think it can be, if we are only eating whole foods and we're not adding any sort of, lab created vitamins or I kind of liken this to our pharmaceuticals, right? Like when
Right.
a pharmaceutical generally is like one little piece of a plant or something found in nature that they've extracted and created in a lab because they want this one little piece of it, when like really you're going to get, like with a hemp plant, right? You're going to get the full benefit if you're using everything in the plant. So I kind of
Absolutely.
like try to relate it back and forth to it's really the same with these synthetic vitamins that are being created for pet foods. Like the body can't, it may work for a while and get some result that you're looking for, but long term overall, like it's not optimal. It's not really what we want to thrive.
Right. And here's something
Yeah.
scary too to think about, or concerning, right? Is so in 1994, in the U.S. we passed the DSHEA law, DSHEA, right? And that essentially made it illegal for the FDA to require safety or efficacy testing for any supplement, any food supplement. That includes our vitamins and minerals. So prior to that, there were about 4,000 vitamin mineral supplement kind of things on the market, and the industry was about $4 billion US every year. Since then, today, right, we've got 85,000 to 90,000, maybe more, supplements on the market. The industry's skyrocketed to be about 40 billion, and along with it, we've essentially polluted our environment, right? But because there's no safety or efficacy testing, those things can, and we've seen it by spot checking both in the United States and in Europe, spot checking bottles and what the label says should be on it in terms of its dosage and, how much vitamin C should be in there, for instance, or how much vitamin A. And it's happened a lot with B vitamins, D, A, it's off. It's off by anywhere from 30% to 100%. So, what we think, even what a manufacturer thinks they might be getting and putting in that food might not necessarily be the case, right? So,
Yeah, that's scary, but so true. And so you were talking about copper, which is such an interesting thing that like everybody is talking about right now. And I think partly because so many people want to blame it on this like rise in beef liver treats. But the AFCO also did away with the maximum limit on copper.
Right. So they did. So yeah. So they approved copper chelate in 1997, and then it was just a few years after that, maybe early 2000s. They did away with the maximum amount of copper, and so very few. So there's about 40 nutrients in the AFCO complete and balanced profile, and only 6 of them have upper limits. So, and copper is no longer one of them. So it really, personal opinion, and from what I've read is that this rise in copper associated hepatopathy is not something we're seeing because dogs are eating more beef liver, right? It's it's because there's more synthetics in there and at unregulated amounts, and that's essentially what Dr. Sharon Center out of Cornell, who's at the center of this issue around copper associated hepatopathy. That's what she's saying. That's what her working group has found through extensive research, and what she's actually reported to the FDA. Unfortunately, I want to say it was maybe a year or so ago, AFCO was tasked with looking at this issue around copper and decided that, first off, they weren't going to have Dr. Sharon Center in their working group, even though she's the expert. And second was that ultimately they then decided without her input that everything's just fine as it is. So,
wow.
Not sure who's
But
looking out for.
it does make me like, and it's so hard. First of all, it's hard to have conversations around pet food in general because people, especially when we're talking about feeding real food to dogs, like whole foods to dogs, people just go crazy around this topic, especially veterinarians and people in vet school and people who work in veterinary medicine. They just go nuts about this topic. So it's a difficult conversation to have anyway. But on top of it, and I think this is something that, I don't see AFCO addressing at all, at least in the near future, is that regulation for feed, which is most, kibbles and things that are generally, we do have quite a few, quote, fresh foods that are adding these premixes with synthetic, vitamins and minerals to them. But the regulation for just in general, any food that is using these premixes with synthetic vitamins and minerals versus pet foods that are being made with whole foods, it's just so hard, I think, for the whole food formulation to rise and meet these crazy requirements that are necessary probably for these, especially kibble manufacturers who are using premixes to make sure they meet AFCO requirements for minimum nutritional guidelines. And that's just a whole other topic that I don't even know I'm anywhere qualified to speak on or about. But it does seem like we're really, like, our fresh food companies are being put in this box of rules and regulation and trying to, especially with the public, general consumers, trying to fit in these boxes of what people know and understand for pet food as it relates to what we have known for the past, 60 years or so plus. And it just is not fair to me, I guess, is the bottom line.
Yeah, I would agree, right? I think the AFCO profile, right? It was created by kibble companies. It was created by kibble and canned pet food companies who said, "Oh, well, we're creating these burnt brown balls, and so we've got to put something in it so that we don't cause nutrient deficiencies in dogs. And so let's just dump this massive concoction of 40 different synthetics in it and call it on top of some shoe leather and call it a winner, right?" And so when you want to do something different, it's very challenging. So, we've run into that. We formulate a food that meets AFCO's profile, right? But it's tricky. We've got to get a little unique, right? It's one of the reasons why we use oysters, right? Because there's a super high zinc requirement for the food that, the requirement for dogs for zinc in AFCO's profile is, I want to say it's like 5 times higher than what the recommended daily amount of zinc is for a man, right? Yeah, really high. And so it's tough to find that in nature. So oysters typically have the richest source of zinc. And so that's the reason why we, predominantly one of the reasons why we use oysters. But yeah, so but the reason why the zinc I think the reason why the zinc requirement is so high, and I'm not the first one to come up with it. I in fact, it's not my idea. I read it. It's that these kibble companies, they realize that they've got all these phytates in all this processed food, right? Because they use so many grains and things and beans that, in small amounts in dogs that can deal with some kind of grain or bean, okay, right? But they're used in tremendously large amounts in most commercial pet food, and they phytates block zinc absorption. They block a lot of minerals from being absorbed. So consequently, there's this. I'm losing my earbud. So consequently, there's this problem with needing more zinc. So AFCO said, "Oh well, we'll just bump up the zinc requirement so that we'll throw so much in there that it'll offset the blockage that happens with the phytates and the fact that it's devoid of meat, which are natural sources of phytates or natural sources of zinc." And but so now you've got companies like mine that want to meet that requirement so that we can be called complete and balanced, and and have to get a little creative. So
you do, you absolutely do. I mean, I see it like just formulating diets for individual dogs. It is interesting. Some of the things we have to do to get to meet AFCO minimum, because, as a professional, right, I can't put a recipe out into the world that isn't complete and balanced, because what if somebody shares it? And so it's very interesting trying to get all of the nutrient requirements from AFCO into a recipe is like, oh, bless you for having done it many times over.
Yeah, what also becomes problematic or troublesome or troubling, right, is that when you then get a dog that develops kind of hypersensitivities, right? And so consequently, they have to be on some kind of elimination diet, some kind of and hypersensitivities can start to go wild, right? So then what do you do, right? Because, okay, now maybe I can't use things like, oysters are a mollusk, but, maybe I can't use that kind of ingredient. So where else do I get that? Or where do I get my choline from, right? If my dog is allergic to eggs. Cauliflower, turns out, has a lot of choline in it, but anyway. Yeah. And and these hypersensitivities, we're seeing that in a lot of different dogs fed on even some really great diets. And, and that probably comes down to just having an imbalance in the microbiome, right? We see dogs that develop itchiness, and sometimes if they're fed commercial food, that's a problem with overnutrition, right? They've got too much energy actually in that diet, in the form of carbs. And so you put them on a more species appropriate diet, and you're going to fix the problem. But we see raw fed dogs that develop hypersensitivities, right? And in some cases, that's a function of just not feeding the gut bacteria appropriately that produce those short chain fatty acids like butyrate and propionate that are responsible for providing the energy for the lining of our gut, right? Or the lining of your dog's gut, and also play a role in modulating the immune system, right? So when the gut becomes leaky because there's not the right species in the gut, and they're not there because they don't get the plant matter to survive, they're not making short chain fatty acids. And so it creates this leaky gut where the immune system gets too good of a look at what's inside your gut. And now it starts to go haywire and create all kinds of hypersensitivity issues and allergy issues. And the way to fix that is basically to start feeding some food, some prebiotic fibers, right? That the gut likes. And then maybe hopefully reaching to some herbs and things to kind of calm down that immune system. So
Yes, it
I
can
think I
be very,
segued off
very
of
tricky.
synthetics there.
It can be so very tricky, but that kind of leads us in, I think, to, you know, dogs that are ill, that have some sort of disease processes. And your talk at the Feed Rail Summit this year was just blew me away on metabolic disease in dogs. And I obviously don't want you to sit here and repeat your whole spiel, but can you just kind of give our listeners like a summary of what you were talking about with metabolic disease in dogs?
Sure. Yeah. So, 60% of our dogs or thereabouts, and 60% of our cats are considered overweight or obese, right? And so, um, weight is a huge factor. Weight is no longer this thing that we used to think about as this piece of luggage we would carry around with us for the day that we decided we're going to go run 5 miles or, whatever. Fat is a massive organ in the endocrine system. It has the biological repertoire for storing and releasing energy and the metabolic machinery to communicate with distant organs, including the central nervous system and the brain. And it is intricately tied into this thing that we call the gut-brain axis, and communicates with us through our nervous system, our immune system, our metabolic system, our cardiovascular system. I mean, it's everywhere. So metabolic syndrome essentially is a cluster of abnormalities that put a body at risk for obesity, type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, obesity, as well as several other conditions that can lead to cancer. So and various other chronic diseases. So conventionally speaking, there are 5 key indicators of metabolic syndrome, right? It's excessive fat around your middle, right? High blood pressure, high blood sugar, high triglycerides, and abnormal cholesterol levels. We can start to add gut dysbiosis to that list, right? Because anytime there is an acute or chronic disease state, the gut microbiome is altered. So, what happens when blood sugar? So what's blood sugar, right? Blood sugar rises when we eat, right? So we eat something, blood sugar rises. The pancreas signals to release insulin, which is responsible for lowering our blood sugar, right? But when we have metabolic syndrome, we start to see insulin resistance. And so insulin resistance is when your cells in your body don't respond to insulin like they should. And so consequently, blood sugar rises. And when you have high blood sugar damages blood vessels. And it damages the blood vessels that are in your brain, and you have cognition, mood, and behavioral disorders. It damages the blood vessels that feed the nerves throughout your body, and you can develop neuropathy. It can damage the blood vessels that feed your kidneys and the nephrons, the little filters in your kidneys, and so you can start to see kidney damage or kidney disease. It can damage the blood vessels throughout your body, and the epithelial cells, which are that thin layer of cells that line all of your blood vessels, which are responsible for exchanging information between your bloodstream and your tissues, and it plays a role in your immune system. And it can damage the blood vessels around your heart, and you can start to see heart disease. So what happens, when you've got this inflammation? So you have this high blood sugar with nowhere to go, right? Because your body's not telling it to store that blood sugar as glycogen, like in your muscles and in your liver. So your body then wants to store that blood sugar as fat, and it's going to store it as fat in your liver, and you're going to get non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which puts you at risk for liver cancer. And it's going to store it as more fat around your organs and in your middle. So, you were once somewhat overweight with some level of pro-inflammatory substances floating around that cause insulin resistance. And now you're more overweight with more of those things floating around. And those things start to dysregulate things like bile acids and the way the body creates and breaks down fat. It's called dyslipidemia. And so you'll see more free fatty acids. You'll see higher cholesterol. You'll see higher triglycerides. But it doesn't end there. More overweight bodies also have more oxidative stress in a reciprocal way. And we talked about that a little bit earlier. That's when those insults to a cell overwhelm that cell's antioxidant power. And that's at the root of chronic disease. And then you also start to see gut dysbiosis, because what happens in overweight bodies is that your gut becomes fragile. And it can become leaky, and stuff seeps out into systemic circulation and starts to cause inflammation and dysregulation of your immune system. So, I mean, it really is a vicious cycle. Do you want me to go into more? I love talking about this stuff.
I know, it's so fascinating. I feel like I could just talk to you forever about it. It really is fast. I think I have become more fascinated with it recently because I've just been for many years on like my own health journey, but recently have actually figured out some things that work for me. Yeah. And that when we find something that works, I think that just, I don't know, triggers us in some way to be like even more like, now I really need to learn more about what's going on and why, and all these different like things that I can do. And I have really gotten into intermittent fasting for myself recently. I do a modified fast for my dog. So she eats one meal a day in the evening, and then in the morning she just has goat's milk. So she is still getting nutrients, but it's a lot easier on the digestive system. So I call it a modified fast for her. And I'm actually getting ready to do a 3-day water fast next week. I'm so excited about it. I've been prepping for this for a while. Yay. I'm so excited about it. But the idea, like combating disease in animals, whether that's humans or dogs or cats or whatever we're talking about, and just kind of going back in history, like let's look at what people have done for years, or animals in the wild have done for, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. Like the answers are there. And I think, fasting can be one of those answers. But I think as much as I would love to talk about fasting with you, more beneficial to listeners, I think, might be the idea of, when you go into your veterinarian's office and your pet is overweight, the first thing they tell you is to feed less. Right. And when you're feeding like a kibble, or you're feeding anything with that is being balanced with synthetic nutrients, that can be very detrimental to the overall health of the body in different ways than what being obese is detrimental to the body. And one of, so Karen Becker, Steve Brown, and Susan Thixton have been looking into this for the DCM issues that we have seen popping up in a lot of dogs in the past number of years. But I think it's also applicable here, where feeding less isn't necessarily, depending on what you're feeding, isn't what you really want to do. Does that make sense to you as well?
It does. So I think, to kind of tie some things together, metabolic syndrome happens because there's something that's wrong in the body, right? That we talked about, like basically being overweight, insulin resistance. I mean, you can come at it a number of different ways, but it's a cycle that's all connected. And then, so it happens because of something that's happening in the body. And then it happens because there's something in the bowl, right? And so it's not just a matter of reducing calories, right? What you eat matters more than the calories that you eat, right? And when you eat it too, because there's this thing that cells go into called autophagy, right? Which is like that cellular housekeeping that happens when you're not continually sticking food in it, right? And because when you put food in it, it goes into this growth mode. And when you take food away, it can kind of clean up and do that xenobiotic metabolism kind of stuff, clean up the cellular junk from all of that, right, in autophagy. And it also can put the body into ketosis, which, so you're burning fat. But there's something that's happening in the bowl, and it's not just about calories, right? And just to Dr. Becker and Susan Thixton and Steve's Brown point, to their point, I think what they are talking about too is that, okay, we're feeding a complete and balanced diet, right? But it's complete and balanced for a dog that needs this number of calories a day. And if my dog is overweight or sedate, and needs fewer calories in order to maintain a healthy weight, then potentially I can see a nutrient deficiency in that dog because I'm feeding them lower or less than the recommended daily allowance, right? And so, and the biggest thing to look for is protein, right? I mean, you want to make sure your dog's getting enough protein, but that doesn't cover all the bases, right? I mean, like we said, there's 40 nutrients in the AFCO complete and balanced profile. So, but there's a lot of things that happen in the bowl in commercial food that go way beyond just calories, right? I mean, we're talking about the chemicals that are applied to the crops that we eat, right? Glyphosate being one of the biggest ones. That's, the average dog has 16 parts per billion glyphosate concentration in their urine, where the average human is like half of 0.5 parts per billion. So, and dogs with outdoor exposures are probably always going to have somewhat higher levels, but that doesn't explain that difference. I mean, that difference is explained by the fact that they're eating contaminated crops, right? And things like corn and soy and rice and things. So, you've got that. You've got heat-induced toxicants, which are awful. Like this is why I think why we see so much benefit come from raw feeding or from feeding gently cooked foods is because the method that you use to cook doesn't create those advanced glycation end products or those advanced lipoxidation end products. And those things, they're mutagenic, carcinogenic, cytotoxic, genotoxic. They're associated with cancer. They're particularly damaging to the cells of the pancreas and to your kidneys. And your pancreas is super important because not only does it responsible for controlling insulin or releasing insulin, but it also controls your digestive enzymes. So, when we start to screw up that, we start to screw up a whole big mess of problems, create a big mess of problems. So, you've got heat-induced toxicants that are in that bowl. You've got imbalanced feeding, and part of imbalanced feeding too also includes hydration. So if we're feeding a dry food to our dogs, they're probably going to live in a chronic state of dehydration, and mildly so, maybe. But water is super important because water is used to make the gastric juice that most dogs digest, or most protein rather, is digested in the stomach of dogs. And so when you don't have enough water there to make the gastric juice to digest the protein, you're going to start to see a bunch of problems. You're going to start to see things like fermentation happen in their gut, in their stomach, which can cause reflux. You're going to, indigestion, you're going to start to see protein particles that are not fully digested pass into the gut. And that can be an inflammation or an allergy trigger. And again, now that we're inflaming the gut, then we open up this whole, the body is connected, right? That's what holism is about. It's what holistic medicine is about. Everything is connected to everything. So we start to open up the floodgates for metabolic dysfunction. So imbalanced feeding, heat-induced toxicants. We talked about synthetics. We talked about chemical load, and there's probably one other one in there, but one in the category of nastiness, but it's escaping me at the moment. So, but yeah, it's not just calories, right?
Yeah.
It's getting the right balance of nutrients: high protein, moderate fat, low carb, good balance of omega-3s, right? And you can test for a lot of these things, which is super exciting. Like you can test your dog's omega-3 levels, omegaquant.com. I remembered what it was. It was natural toxicants. So those are things like, that last category I was thinking of mentioning. It's so those are things like aflatoxin and glycoalkaloids and endotoxins, which are particularly damaging to the gut. And when you talk about metabolic health, and that's a very, very cute puppy you have there. But
Thank you.
endotoxins are these substances so they exist inside of our gut, right? And they're a product of gram-negative bacteria, and we have gram-negative bacteria in our gut. But when we eat certain foods, or when we eat foods that don't, like if you've ever gotten food poisoning, it's not necessarily the salmonella that's causing the problem. It's the endotoxins that are causing that havoc in your gut. And so, like dogs that eat ultra processed foods, they're eating not wholesome sources of ingredients. So there are a lot of endotoxins are heat and sterilization resistant. They're tiny little molecules that exist inside the cell of gram-negative bacteria. There's about 2 million endotoxin molecules inside one cell of gram-negative bacteria. And when that cell replicates, little bits are released. But when that cell dies, all those endotoxin molecules are released. So if you think about some foods that make it that are ingredients that are not wholesome, right? Maybe they've got salmonella on them and they're not handled properly, right? So one cell of salmonella will become a million cells of salmonella in about 6 to 12 hours. And then when that product, that whatever that ingredient is, either goes through a rendering process or goes through a cooking process or is ingested, those salmonella die, and that 1 million cells of salmonella will release 2 trillion endotoxin molecules. And in unmanageable levels, endotoxin initiates and perpetuates damage and diseases of the gut. And also the brain, the cardiovascular system. Endotoxin in the body is brought to the liver where it's inactivated, but too much endotoxin in the liver is going to damage your liver. And this is super important because other substances can interact in your liver with that endotoxin to damage your liver. And those other things can be things like too much copper and too much vitamin A and too much iron. And so, so much of what goes into a lot of commercial pet food is undermining our pet parents' effort to try to get their dog to a healthy weight, right? I mean, a lot of parents try to right size their dog, right? They're trying to, and their cat, right? They're trying to reduce calories and increase exercise and measuring out their food. Yet this trend of our dogs getting fat and fatter is just increasing, and it's happening because of that ultra processed stuff that's on the grocery store shelves and things. So.
Yeah, it's like the more and more I learn, it's just like this perfect storm that they've created. And not, we can get into the is it intentional, is it not intentional, blah, blah, blah. Of course, there are some not nice human beings in the world, but I originally don't think it was intentionally, anybody was
Yeah, I think
setting
it's
out to
motivated by
harm our
money,
animals.
right? I mean, I
Yeah.
think it's motivated by money. Just like when you look at a bag of Purina, I did the math on this. I don't know, a couple of months ago, maybe, and I just have. What else do I do on a Sunday, right? I can't say this. So anyway, but I said, I wonder how much Purina spent on the ingredients to make that bag of Pro Plan, right? And when it came down to it, like when you stripped away the profit margins of what a store would typically charge, to put the bag on a shelf, what they would retail it for, what the distributor wholesaled it for, what the manufacturer sold it to the distributor for. When you take away those profit margins, right, and then you take away Purina's profit margin, right, and what they pay all their executives and all that kind of stuff to feed a 60-pound dog, they're probably spending 25 cents on the ingredients for that 60-pound dog a day. Right? I mean, so, ultimately it just comes down. It's not like anybody at any one of those big companies set out to say, I'm going to make a whole bunch of really sick dogs, right? They just set out to make money. And that also ties into the fact that they own a network of veterinary hospitals, right? I mean, that VCA, Banfield, Blue Pearl, they're owned by big kibble companies, which if you think about it, it's kind of like McDonald's owning your doctor's office, right? I mean, they're going to tell you to eat McDonald's. They're going to tell you to eat kibble because, ultimately that is the mantra. That is what the people who work there are told to say. And it's a condition upon them working there. And, and they're not educated to, doctors are extremely educated. Don't, get me wrong on that one, but they don't learn about nutrition in vet school. And where they're getting their information from a lot of times is big kibble companies. I was at a dinner with a bunch of veterinarians and some big muckety mucks from Purina, and they had no idea who I was, and not that they would care. And I sat there and listened to these couple of people tell these doctors, oh, it's not the ingredients that matter, it's the nutrients, which is AKA what synthetics are all that matters, right? It's not the beef, it's synthetics. And throwing and saying that that what's most important. They were asked one of the doctors asked the Purina folks, and this really stuck in my mind. One of the doctors asked one of the Purina people. So the doctor says, I get asked a lot by pet parents how to pick out a good pet food, right? What to look for. And so what would you say I should tell that pet parent, right? And there was a whole bunch of word salad there that the answer, I couldn't really understand what the point was. Something about feeding trials. You should look for a bag that said it was done, had feeding trials done on it, which feeding trials, by the way, are very simple to do. There are a handful of dogs, and basically all you have to prove is that you didn't injure the dog, right? I mean, that the CBC and chem still look fine.
And a very short, 6 months or something.
In a very short period of time, right? I mean, the bar is really, really low. and but what stuck out of my mind was that he said, oh, well, tell them not to look at ingredients. Ingredients don't matter. It was so hard for me not to speak up. And I had been sworn to silence as to warrant the invitation to that dinner.
Yeah.
So I didn't say anything, but yeah, it was pretty bad.
Wow. Yeah. And oh my God, I just want to,
so yeah, I think it's just motivated by money.
Yeah, it's like, do I want to cry? Do I want to be mad? Do I want to all of the emotions come up with that? But
I mean, I think back onto what made me want to start Goodness Gracious, right? And it was to be not that in every way, right? I mean, it was to for me, Goodness Gracious is about a spirit, right? And it's a spirit of doing the right thing for our companion animals, and along the way doing the right thing for our planet. So, and to improve our connection with each other. So we try to do a lot of educational stuff with the stores who carry our products and try to get the word out to, this is what Feed Real Summit was all about, right? And share knowledge that way, because knowledge is power. And trying to choose the right ingredients, right? Mindfully source ingredients, because pasture raised over confined animal feeding operation proteins matter. And because non-GMO and organic produce matter, right? We can't choose all organic because we still have to make it affordable. So we pick and choose, like, okay, is that basically a clean vegetable or a clean fruit? And the ones that aren't, or the ones that might be the ones that are treated with glyphosate, well, we're going to go organic with those, right? And because it's great to build something that's the best thing on the planet, but it is not the best thing on the planet if people cannot afford to buy it. right? And
Yeah, that's true.
so making good choices with regards to our produce and clean ingredients, and for us that also extended to our carbon footprint, right? And being able to look for more recyclable packaging, compostable materials, more green energy, and so yeah, just wanted to be not that. And something that was a lot better, right? That made people feel really good when they fed it, when they bought it, when they fed it. And not only that, but they saw the difference in their dogs. And, that not only did maybe their dogs right size, right? They lost the weight that they were supposed to lose, but all those things that you weren't necessarily counting on that came about, like their personalities blossomed and they became more playful and more interactive. And that senior dog who once looked like a couch potato that was arthritic is now, playing with the 4-year-old down the street. And so, that's the kind of
Yeah.
stuff that I love to hear and love to be able to create.
Oh my gosh. It's the absolute best. And I've said this so many times on this show that being like starting out as a dog trainer, but having fed my dogs fresh food and then taking that and implementing that with dog training clients and having them start feeding their dogs fresh food diets, I was just putting myself out of work, and I couldn't have been happier about it.
Yeah,
Like
right.
it
Yeah.
I honestly, my skin is too thin to hang in the dog training world anyway. That place is dog trainers are crazy, but so it all worked out. But like, yeah, I just could not have been happier to just see the changes in these dogs and then have them have really for the most part never hear from these people again
Yeah.
was like confirmation for me that like so much of what we're seeing and what we think is wrong with our dogs today is just all like diet is foundational, and you can't, I don't even know who is the first person to say it, but we're all saying it now. You can't out supplement a bad diet,
No, no,
and it
you
is
can't.
so true.
No, can't juice
So
cleanse your
true.
way out of a daily Happy Meal, you know? You know?
No, no, my goodness.
So,
There's so much work. Well, even like this 3-day water fast that I'm getting ready to do, it's not like I have put it off a couple of times because I just keep learning more and more. And I'm like, there's so much prep that has to go into this. And it's really like for our dog, it's the same way. We have to keep learning, keep researching, and never give up. Like, there's never a good enough for me. When it comes to my animals, for sure.
I
There's
know.
never a good enough. I got to keep learning. I got to keep figuring things out and improving things. And I find when I do that with my animals, I end up doing it with myself too. So I think there's just
Right.
so much benefit
I
to,
agree.
just keep learning and keep implementing and keep trying things, because every animal is an individual, and what works for one dog may not work for the next dog, and that's okay because there's something else out there that is going to work
Right.
for
Right.
that dog. And that's again why I really I'm very selective, and I of who I bring on the podcast, of course, but especially when it comes to like brands, because I want to make sure that the information that is being put out into the world is like the absolute best that I can put out there. And I really love everything you're doing with Goodness Gracious, and I want to thank you,
Thank
and
you, Jess.
just let you know that you're so appreciated. And I'm just so happy to be telling more people about your food and your
Thank
treats.
you. Thank you. Oh,
Of
I am
course.
very grateful to be asked to be here, and it's so special to be here, and you are a delight
Oh,
and an inspiration, and so that's
you're so sweet. Well, where can people find out more?
yeah. So our website is goodnessgraciousco.com. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. And we are we ship direct to consumer, and we also have growing distribution in various regions throughout the United States. So that's expanding pretty much by the day, which is super exciting. We just got picked up on Susan Thixton's 2024 list too for our food. So that's really special. We came out with it in late 2021. So the first year we could have been on it was 2022 when we were. So it's our third year in a row on her list. And so that's really that's helping to get the word out there too about us, which is really spectacular. And you too, which is great. But,
no, her list is, I know.
So,
I like,
yeah.
It's like the Bible, right?
Yep. Yeah, so our food is in a growing number of independent pet supply stores, which we are just over the moon about, because, I mean, that's where these dialogues happen for the most part, right? I mean, we're one small company, and, you know, we don't have, we can get out there as much as we can on social media and events, but the education really happens at the point of purchase in those pet supply stores. So those are the people that have a lot of knowledge. And so we encourage folks to check out those places. And if you don't see us there, ask.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. If it's not in your local healthy pet food store, ask them about it. I know I was telling you before we recorded, I was talking to the owner of the Nautical Dog, and she was so excited to bring your products in and add freezer space. I think she's maxed out with the number of freezers she can put in now, but she's like, I need more and I don't know where I'm going to put them, which is the best problem to have.
It's
a
the
pet
best
store
problem
owner, right?
Right.
So definitely check out Goodness Gracious Co. That's CO.com. And is it just Goodness Gracious on Facebook and Instagram?
Goodness Gracious Pet that is our handle on both Instagram and Facebook.
Perfect. I will make sure to put that in the show notes. And Amy, thank you so much. I hope to have you back soon, Jess. Especially once you're ready to let everybody know what more you have
new
planned.
Secret sauce.
Always love hearing that, because there is so much room. I know that, you know, when we think about pet food, it's very overwhelming. There's so much out there. There's so many choices. But at the same time, when we niche it down to like, what is the really good food out there on the market? What is the healthiest, best I can buy for my animal? That list is pretty small. So I'm thrilled that you're on that list and that you are adding to that list.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Make sure that you're following the show so you never miss an episode. And please take a moment to rate the show on your podcast app. I'd also love it if you'd share this podcast with your friends and family so that they can benefit from the information to help their pets live long, happy lives too. Don't forget to take advantage of this special discount as a listener today and get access to over 100 online videos in my online dog training, The Furry Family Coach. Just go to thefurryfamilycoach.com and use code PODCAST at checkout to get your first month for only $7. That's thefurryfamilycoach.com and use code PODCAST at checkout to get your first month for only $7. I can't wait to have you join and see you on the inside.